All right. Good morning, everybody. It's morning here in Minnesota. It's morning down in Houston, Texas, where our next guest joins us, Dr. Mike Hardin. Dr. Mike Hardin is an old friend, former student. He and I knew each other when I was at Texas Tech University, and he's expressed some interest in participating in this video project because he's an experiential family therapist, a la Virginia Satir, and I'll let him talk a little bit about that later. But Mike, tell us a little bit about how you found family therapy specifically. How did you, out of all these mental health disciplines, why family therapy?
Yeah, that was pretty deliberate as far as the universe bringing family therapy to me, but it all started with just growing up in a family that just wasn't doing it right. And when I finally went to college, I had my first psychology class, and I realized, oh, there's information out there to help people do it better than they would do it otherwise. Now, and that was a shock to me. I was thinking, I need to get into this field. I need to help people know because there is information to know how to do things better. Um, and as I was going through my undergrad, I had to work full time, and I was working for a juvenile detention center. And at the time, um, Richard Wampler was working at the center, bringing students in, and I got to know him over time. But I had a question about what I was seeing in the juvenile detention center. These kids came in, and so many behaviors, so much acting out, and it wasn't a month or two into their time, and they were doing so much better. We saw kids starting to thrive, and it was so exciting. And then they would get released, and within a month or two, they'd be back in and locked up. And so I went to Richard and I asked him, I said, what's the deal? All this good work, and it just gets thrown away as soon as they get out. Because really the reason is we're not working with the system. We are just working with the individual. So they're able to cope well while they're in here, but as soon as they go back out, they have to work and survive in the systems they belong to. And this started opening up a wide array of thoughts of, wow, I haven't even been thinking systemically. And that was the big draw. That was kind of where it was. I realized I wanted to study marriage and family therapy where systems were talked about.
Mhm. And you gravitated towards Virginia Satir's symbolic, or sorry, but experiential model, not symbolic. That's Carl Whitaker stuff. But you kind of gravitated towards Satir's work. Tell me a little bit about that, how you got there, and what was attractive about it for you.
Sure. First, I started working for hospice right out of my master's, and my master's was not systemic. I started working for a hospice, and I was realizing what I was trained in within my master's wasn't being helpful to me working with widows. These widows were in deep grief, and my idea of being cognitive behavioral with them was not fitting. So I went back to some of my old thoughts of Virginia Satir and what I was learning about her, and that was very helpful. But in my doctorate, that was uh, I was helped to see that I was actually more experiential than anything in my training, both feedback from you and from Karen Wampler. Just naturally in the therapy room, I was much more experiential. And this helped me to think, okay, I just need to study a little bit more about experiential therapy. And I studied Carl Whitaker, Virginia Satir, and realized I matched really well with the belief systems and the techniques that Satir was presenting.
Yeah. What was it about the model that kind of hooked you?
Two things. She was talking about spirituality long before it was okay, or I mean, even now it's hard to talk about spirituality in therapy training. But she was talking about spirituality, but she was also talking about the innate value of a human being, and I really connected with that. There's a lot of things that I was doing as a young person that I wasn't really happy with my behavior, and I saw other people in their behavior and that not being really great, but that didn't necessarily take away from the value of who they were.
Mhm.
And I was able to see that through the lens of Virginia Satir.
Yeah. Well, one of the things I'd love for you to do is just describe maybe a typical intervention that might be in that experiential school and how it's landed on a client, or maybe give a clinical example of something you've done.
Sure. One of the things that Virginia would do when she was with a lot of people actually at a conference was she would do a parts party.
Mm.
And this was helping clients see that they were made up in multiple parts, right? Very IFS. Richard Schwartz even talks about getting inspired to work with parts through Virginia Satir. But what Virginia would do is actually help people identify multiple parts of who they were. And and then she would allow them to see how each of those parts were both strengths and sometimes got in the way of how they interacted with others. I was visiting with a client, a couple. I was working with a couple, and we were talking just about yearnings and what they were hoping for in the future. And as she was describing who she was and how she was at the beginning of her dating relationship with her husband, she started talking in parts, right? It was just kind of natural. Well, part of me really wants to go back to that time where he was really nurturing to me, really loving to me. And and so I stopped it. I said, okay, let's try to do this parts party, which by the way is really hard in a therapy room. And I later developed ways to do it. But at that time, I was like, okay, let's talk about parts. Um, and I'll show you some cards even as we talk right now. But I developed these, but she was saying, okay, when we were a couple, and then she started telling the story. And then she would say, there's still part of me that's like a little girl. And and as she's telling these stories about how she really wants to be held by her husband or really wants to connect with him, um, the husband kind of lit up. He's like, I didn't know that. She also mentioned a different part of her that was really angry at her husband, the part of her that she would describe as the judging part.
Mm.
And so when she would say, there's a part of me that wants to be held, there's a part of me that would really like for him to love me when I am scared. He's like, when you're saying things, I take it like you're judging me like I'm not good enough, like I'm bad, like I should be doing something better. And this is the part of, and I start pushing away from her.
Huh.
And she was able to see, oh, I understand that. And so they started understanding each other through the discussion of parts. At the end, one of the things that they developed as a tool is like the husband would come in from work and he'd be really frustrated. And she would come up to him, and say, just to let you know, the part of me that really needs you to be present and hold me, I'm needing that part today. And he'd say, that was so difficult because I would come in, I'm in a bad mood, but it was amazing how easy it was for me to shift and say, I'm in a bad mood, but my wife, I see that little girl now. I
Mm.
didn't see her before. And they were able to engage and talk about it and have a language for saying, this is what I'm needing in this moment.
Mm. So the cards became a facilitator for some of the ideas that they were having, the experiences they were having of themselves.
Yeah, they
But
needed the visual. Yeah.
do you lay the cards out, like are the cards out in front of them and then they grab onto one and say, this is the one I resonate with and here's why I resonate?
Yes.
Yeah.
I actually go through Virginia Satir actually had a way of doing a parts party. I
Yeah.
do the exact same thing that she did, but I use cards instead of people coming up on stage and acting those parts.
Yeah, she would have sometimes she'd have people go behind a screen and then they'd come out,
Yes,
I'm the little girl right now, or I'm the judging, the
that's right.
more dominant judging person, and they'd go behind the screen or they come up on stage. Yeah. So you've got these cards in front and they pick them out and say, this is who I identify with in that moment. And then he's able to say, well, this is the one that I see when you're actually being this little girl, and I see the kind of the judging, kind of
Yeah.
heavy-handed person. Oh, fascinating. Love it.
Right. And the really cool thing is then there's times in which I say, okay, you know what? Sometimes we don't have a choice of who shows up, right? And so I'll have them have their stack of their parts and the other person has a stack of theirs, and we shuffle them and we just turn them over. Okay. So you show up with this one and he shows up with this one. How does it go? Right.
Yeah.
And they're like, oh, that does happen. And they tell stories about how that does happen at times, but it gives them a way of doing that, not in the middle of a crisis, but being able to say, oh yeah, our parts, we show up with our parts all the time, and not all the time are we choosing the part we show up with.
Yeah. And so it's fascinating because you're doing it in the therapy session. So it's not the heat of the moment. It's not right in the middle of the biggest fight they've ever had, right? And so that they have less emotional reactivity, to use a Bowenian term. But oh, that's awesome. And so the thing I love about experiential is that you as the therapist, and I don't know if you agree with this or not, but you're in charge of managing that in session behavior, right?
That's right.
It's on you. Like, do you feel the weight of that? Like it's on you to give them a new experience?
Well, I kind of see it a little bit different. It's not that I'm
Okay.
trying to give them a new experience. I'm trying to invite them into the experiences they naturally have. And then I start identifying, can you see what's going on here? How you're reacting to this? What's really going on in your body during this time? And kind of slow down the process so they can go, oh, this is what I'm thinking, or this is really what I'm needing. So I'm not necessarily creating the new experiences, but really allowing them to have the experiences that they normally have and be able to give meaning to it.
Yeah, I love it. And how does this? I'm sure you've done this with other couples. How does it land on people typically? This
Oh,
kind of arts
it,
part.
so I do training with students and I do live supervision, and all of them have access to these cards. And I've seen them with all different kind of clients, all different kind of cultures. I use them all the time with my clients, and it lands really well. Because one of the things that also helps is for a client that might come in and they're depressed, for them to be able to go through this parts party and realize only part of them, there's a part of them that's really depressed. There's a part of them that wants hope. There's a part of them. Now they realize my whole person is not depressed,
Yeah,
but there are parts of me that are depressed. And so even as I'm working with individuals, when we start talking about parts, they're able to identify, oh, I'm much more than just how I'm trying to identify myself right now.
yeah. Great stuff. How do you think this approach lands on, like people from different cultures, different environments? How does this land on them? I mean, there are some cultures that are maybe more reserved with emotion and things like that. Do you have thoughts about the context and how clients show up?
Yeah. So what's really incredibly amazing to me as I've been in the satir world more and more is how big this is in all of the Asian countries. So in part of the world where we don't imagine they would be able to talk the way that satir would invite them into or express themselves. This is actually where Virginia Satir's model is actually the most active.
Hmm.
It's being practiced all over the world. What we have found over time is it's not so much that Satir's model is good for people are not going to be as receptive to Satir's model if it's not coming to them in the person that they connect with.
Hmm.
As a Hispanic man, I can go into the Hispanic community and use Satir's model, and they adore it. They love it. It speaks to them. That's the same for China. That's the same for Africa. As we go into different countries using Satir's model, people who look like them actually present the best. They receive it, they trust it, and they embrace it. But when the person who's presenting the model goes in and they are look different and they're not trusted immediately, that's the difficult thing. So the better we are at getting people to practice this model in different countries, connecting to their own people, that's been the where it's received the best.
Yeah. One of the things that I get when I show students videos of Virginia Satir, like she's always touching people, right? She's teaching people how to hug and here, feel this part of your body. So much of her presence was about touch and things. How do you deal with touch as a man? I think maybe rules around touch are probably different. I don't know. Have you thought much about touch in this model?
Yeah, as a matter of fact, one of the things that we talk about in with the satir people is it's actually more unethical not to touch.
Oh,
But what
interesting.
is it? Because we need it. There's research out there that shows that babies don't even survive if they're not touched when they're young. We need touch and we need to model touch. Now, Satir was actually asked about this in an interview, and she said, I don't just touch with my hands. Long before I'm touching with my hands, I'm touching with my eyes. I'm touching them. And she started talking about her senses and how she connects with people. She goes, when I actually reach out and hold somebody's hand, they've already told me with their eyes and their ability to be close to me in proximity that it's okay for me to touch their hand. So she started talking about the ethics of of being safe before touching. We just didn't see that in the videos.
Yeah, fascinating. So Mike, do you have words of advice for people who are thinking that maybe this experiential model kind of fits for them? What should they do? How do they get more training in this?
Yeah. So first, Satir used to say that it's more important what a therapist believes than the techniques they use.
Hmm.
What she was trying to show people is you really need to see the miracle that people are. You need to understand when you see them, try to connect with that part of them that is their spiritual essence. Because she believed each of us were miracles, and she wanted to connect to the miracle in a person. And because of that, she was being able. I mean, there's people who have never experienced being seen. They're not honored, and to be honored in her presence was one of the ways in which she was able to connect. She would say, "You need to believe the best that the people are wonderful. People are miracles. People behave differently. People choose behaviors that are not very fitting with who they are or their relationships, but they are of great value." So one of the things that I would say to new therapists looking at developing in the Satir model is watch out. It's going to be a journey. You're going to actually be challenged to look at how do I see people? How do I see that person that just cut me off in on the highway? Do I start judging their character, the person behind the wheel, or do I start judging their behavior? The truth is, a lot of us struggle with not seeing the miracle in other people, and it challenges you to grow in that area. So uh, just be aware that this is going to be a growth experience getting into understanding Satir's model. And the Satir Global Network is the organization that promotes Satir's model. And you can go there, and there's training available. Um, One of the best training places for Satir's model is also in Canada. There's the Satir Institute of the Pacific that does a lot of training as well. And in both places, people are going to be able to find the kind of training they need, whether it is a short series that they just want to get exposed to the Satir model, or 10-week or several month trainings that really help you to delve into the depth of her model.
Yeah, very cool. Uh, Mike, I really appreciate you being with us today on this interview. So thank you so much for your time, and I wish you the best of luck with this model going forward. I'm so glad that there's like a next generation, right? Virginia can't be
Yeah.
with us, but we have a next generation of people who are carrying the torch. And thank you so much for sharing these thoughts and this perspective with us today.
Thanks, Steve.